Hi, I'm Lorne Rivers, and this is the fifth installment in my series on writing, Lauren's Inkwell. Choosing your main character is one of the most important decisions you can make. It'll have a significant impact on all of the other factors relevant in your story. The main character is generally the person at the center of things, although it's not always obvious when you're developing your cast of characters. Typically, this is the person who the events of the story will have the greatest impact upon. Now, people in power are usually unsuitable for this purpose for practical reasons. There are a lot of eyes on them, they have a security detail, things like that. Usually they can't be where they need to be. Top characters like presidents, they're often suited for adding drama, but usually not for leading the charge. Now, of course, obviously this is not always the case. There could be a monarch that slips out of their responsibilities and gets involved in the story that way. And of course there's always the Fallen from Grace story where they're deposed from power and the story is about them trying to get that back. But, just something to consider. If you decide you want to base your story on the President of the United States, then you have to remember it's kind of hard for him to get time by himself, and there are a lot of situations that he would not be allowed to be in just because of the position he holds. Now, usually you'll want to follow people at the middle or the bottom of the chain rather than the top. With a small cast, usually I find that the main character is the person you have to work the least at getting them into the action. Usually they're at the center of most major interactions between characters, typically either the instigator or experiencing the effects of everyone else's actions, driven forward by the events around them. Now, what this probably means is that if this character that you're writing about tends to be the one that gets in the most trouble, they're probably your main character. Or if they're the one that is at the center of whatever conflict you have designed, like they're trying to find something that's important to them. It's like they're probably your main character. Now, it's usually the signs of a good story with a well-developed setting when the events push the character into the main plot. Sort of like a case where you really don't have to work that hard to get the character to be involved in the story. Now, if you have a hard time figuring out why they'd be there a fair amount of the time, consider approaching it from another character's perspective. Selecting the wrong protagonist can set everything off balance or shift the main events of your story. In one of the early versions of a project I was working on, I had originally had the characters, one of the supporting characters' children going looking for him, and they had to recruit people to help them because they were relatively young, teenagers or something. And the problem that I ran into was that it really just reached the point when I was working on the idea, and this of course is an old idea that I've long since abandoned, but the point is that when the characters accomplish the goal of whatever it is they set out to do, in this case finding out what happened to their dad, then they had no further reason to be out there and the story was over. Now, I ended up resolving this particular dilemma by aging the characters up a few years and making them adults so that they were actively running a cargo ship so that they would have a reason to be running around in space in the first place. And that just kind of gave me other places to go with the idea after the fact. Now, another example I'll give you is in the original version of Blue Moon, when I was first developing the first novel, the story was going to be based on Abby, with Logan having a parallel story, because the idea was that they were going to kind of run into each other from time to time, and I'm not sure if they were either going to be rivals or if they're going to be competing or just two separate trails of investigation. But when the plot shifted, I had to reallocate certain details to other characters, and Abby became a supporting main cast member since I felt that she couldn't carry the lead role. With her new backstory, it just wasn't going to make sense, as if she was still the lead character, I felt it would have taken too long to play out, and it wouldn't mesh well with the other elements in play. So, as a result, the storyline shifted to Logan, and she became the focus of the series. Now, Abby's still important, and she's still a main character, but the story gained a whole different feel when the story switched protagonists. Now, if you have a larger cast, you might have more than one main character. Now, even in an ensemble, you'll still have those characters that are clearly main characters, and with multiple characters, you can tell different plot threads, and it may insulate you from needing to write a character out or running into slow parts in your story. And, let's see, this is a little bit of information that I kind of learned from watching Babylon 5 and other shows like that. My suggestion is also you might want to consider, if you have a big cast, that it's a good idea to have a secondary main character in case the main character dies for whatever reason. It's like, imagine it like you're doing a TV show where your main actor leaves for whatever reason. If it's planned, it can result in some good plot developments as well as the option for them to come back in a future episode, and sometimes those are some of the best stories. But, you usually want to have a backup plan just in case whatever happens, mostly to keep yourself from writing yourself into a wall. It's like, if something happens to my main character, or if the best thing dramatically is for them to be either written out or written off, do I have another plan to continue the series? And, usually it's a good idea to at least just think about that, just so that if something happens, you have plan B. And if you have multiple main characters, sometimes you can also get an idea for spin-offs if you want to have this character have their own adventure or something of that nature, which is a lot easier when you have an ensemble. And, I'll just say this, that it's never bad to have options. It's always good to have places to go with your story, with your characters, things that you can do with them if you have to come up with something, short stories, whatever. And the main character, your main character, should either prefer to get their hands dirty or, by virtue of their position, end up in the center of the conflict. Now, this is kind of like what I was saying earlier a little bit. It's like they should be the kind that wants to get involved in the action, or their position just results in them being forced into the center of the conflict. Now, either one of these is fine, and they're both good ways to get your main character involved and have it seem organic. Now, I would suggest that your main character should be somewhat likable, since readers are going to spend a lot of time with this character. Now, this doesn't mean that they have to be everybody's friend, or, that you can't do an anti-hero or something, because there are plenty of likable anti-heroes, like Wolverine, other characters along those lines. And what's really important to remember, though, is that you're asking readers, you're asking viewers to follow these characters, to potentially fall in love with them, to spend a lot of time reading their adventures, and to maybe see what comes up next in their lives. And with that in mind, you usually want to make sure that this is a character that has redeeming qualities, that has some chemistry with the other characters, just somebody that if you were reading this book, that you would want to be their friend, or at least that you wouldn't mind their company. And I think that it's important. It's important to make sure that this main character is somebody that you can get along with. And if you're not sure who the main character should be, try rolling each one forward and see who provides you the most story options. I generally like to try and have an outline before I start writing, but sometimes I just, in the case of like short stories, I just kind of come up with an idea and then just see where it goes. And sometimes the character that I think is going to be the main character ends up turning out to just be something else. So, if you move the idea forward, sometimes you'll get an idea on what to do next, and then all of a sudden it all kind of falls into place. Now, I would also suggest as an alternative to consider choosing an unconventional main character. Perhaps rather than following the movers and the shakers, you'd rather follow their assistant. Overlooked and underpaid, they may be in the perfect position to see or know something that will send them on an adventure. Now, the main character is also often involved in romantic subplots independent of what you're writing. No, it's not essential that you have a relationship with anybody in the course of your story, but often the main character is best suited for this purpose due to their central position to the plot. The relationships usually equal drama, and often it adds flavor. Now, of course, if you're going to have love interest, you usually want your main character to be involved in that, just because it gives you the most organic opportunities to explore their relationship and just kind of play around with it as suits your story. Now, there are many ways to do it, but I hope that this has given you some insight on things to consider when selecting your main character. And I will see you in Part 6, Character Development.
Thanks for watching, and if you liked it, click the subscribe button and leave a comment below. You can also find me on Twitter and a few other places on the web, or support me via Patreon or Ko-fi. Zebra hugs!